We're lucky to be joined by another terrific panel today. Our moderator today, Dario Marquez, is president of MVM. Dario first began his career serving as a Secret Service officer for the Nixon, Ford, and Carter administrations. He's been named one of the 100 most influential Hispanics in America by Hispanic Business Magazine, and he's also a former chairman of the Hispanic College Fund and has been an active supporter of the Hispanic Youth Foundation. Dario has also provided expert testimony before the U.S. Senate Committee on Terrorism and has appeared several times as an industry commentator in both television and print media. Currently, Mr. Marquez serves on the Virginia Secure Commonwealth panel. Dario?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. You can tell that I have my watch here because I am keeping track of the time because I want to make sure that you have time for questions. My fellow colleagues, associates, and friends, we are talking about the Department of Homeland Security. It's my pleasure to be here. I want to take a moment also to join my panelists in thanking Mark Warner. And I just want to say something about Mark. You know, there's a lot of people that talk about small business. There's a lot of people that talk about the role that contractors play with the federal government, both small and large. But I can say one thing that I think you all would agree is that Mark gets it. He gets it. He was an entrepreneur, so he appreciates entrepreneur. He ran a business, so he knows all the frustrations that we're going through. And like he likes to say, he brings this to the job that we hired him to do as senator. So I'm grateful that he put this on. I'm also grateful for Carlos Del Toro, my good friend, for recommending this to Mark and making this happen. Thank you, Carlos. We're here to talk about the Department of Homeland Security, a department that was put together in 2003, a department that has 22 agencies and over 200,000 employees. It's the third largest cabinet department in government. It is the most substantial reorganization of federal agencies since the National Security Act of 1947, and it is the most diverse merger of federal agencies and responsibilities in our history. Before I start, a couple things I want to say. The panelists, I'm going to introduce the panelists. I've given them questions ahead of time to kind of stimulate. They got those questions. I'm going to start asking them questions. And then what I want to do is, where I have my trusty watch up here, is I'm committed to leaving time for questions from the floor. So at some point what I'm going to do is stop my questions if I see that you have questions. So what I'm hoping to do is, unfortunately, there's not aisles down the middle, but I'd like to make sure that if you have questions, if you could start letting us know or just standing up, I'm going to stop, and when I see that there's questions out there, I'm going to stop asking my questions and let you ask your questions. So let me begin by the panelist. A recognized expert in the management of administrative and technical support contracts, a 21-year veteran of the United States Marine Corps, and the current chief executive of Quality Support, Inc., Mr. Wayne Gatewood. Mr. Wayne, if you'd raise your hand. The current deputy chief of procurement for the Department of Homeland Security, who previously served as the division director and deputy assistant administrator for acquisition at the Transportation Security Agency, Mr. Rick Gunderson. Rick? A former aviator, a Navy pilot who served on the staff of the National Security Council and the National Counterterrorism Center, the current director of Homeland Security at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Rick Ozzie Nelson. Rick. All right, gentlemen, I'm going to start right with the questions, and I'm going to start with the first one, Mr. Gunderson. What effect will the looming budgetary and efficiency constraints have on the department's future procurements? What effect will the budgetary constraints have on future procurements at DHS?
Well, it already has, in the sense that it really makes the department leadership, both at the headquarters level as well as the individual components, really examine their mission set. And to define what are you have to reprioritize in some cases, what are the true needs to be able to meet those missions. Earlier this year, over the past 9 months, the department completed its first quadrennial Homeland Security review, which basically reset what are the main mission sets. Preventing terrorism, securing the borders, enforcing, administering immigration laws, cybersecurity, and resilience to disasters. Those are the 5 in a nutshell. And from those 5 top-level mission sets, the individual components and organizations really have to define what are those activities associated with those missions that they're going to carry out. So we've been going through what's called a bottom-up review with the respective organizations to identify what they are. And as you go through that process, this eventually feeds into your budget builds for the future years and to determine, where do the dollars need to go. You heard earlier today from both the senator and former congressman about where we are with the budgets. And certainly the administration has come out with policies in the past year that have described we need to do more with either less or about the same. We're already implementing, in addition to identifying which programs need to continue to get funded at certain levels and others that may get diminished, we're also looking at better ways to do business in response to the Office of Management and Budget's policy from last year about achieving acquisition savings. That's a combination of reducing spending in certain areas as well as reducing the use of high-risk contract authorities.
Mr. Nelson, there is an anti-contractor sentiment among certain agencies, among some agencies, that makes communication between the contractor and the government official difficult, if not impossible. How is this issue, in your opinion, being addressed at the Department of Homeland Security?
That's a good question. One of the things we have to keep in mind is when, after September 11th, we stood up 2 departments, Director of National Intelligence and the Homeland Security Department. And it wasn't like we had a sleeper cell of Homeland Security and intelligence experts waiting for these 2 departments to be stood up. So to make up for that gap, we had to, and I was in government at the time, bring contractors on to fill that personnel need, that urgent personnel need. And the demand for technologies to fight terrorism and to secure the homeland, and the demand for analysts and policy analysts and acquisition individuals to do that was significant. Unfortunately, there wasn't necessarily the right folks that were out there. And to meet that demand, I remember getting consultants coming to NCTC that just graduated from college. So certainly, that was just the way it was. So I think what happened is after a while, there's no one to blame there. That was just the dynamic at the time. But over the years, we've seen somewhat of obviously a kickback to that with the government having to rely on contractors, and it was a tense relationship. And now we're seeing, this reaction. But at the end of the day, as has been pointed out, and I'll say this as a policy analyst, as a former government employee, we need contractors. The need for contractors isn't going to go away. The need for contractors that have 15 or 20 years of government experience can't be found elsewhere. So we have to really keep that in mind moving forward, and keep that in mind that this is a partnership and this is a team. The government is going to continue to require contractors, and the contractors are going to continue to provide valuable service to the government. So it's that open communication that we're going to need. And now that DHS, in my opinion, finally has some breathing room to actually stand up a viable acquisition program and some breathing room to install strategies that can drive the technologies and requirements and need statements, I think you're going to see this change, and we'll go away from this visceral reaction we've had the last couple of years towards contractors.
Mr. Gatewood, how is DHS dealing with the issue of the GAO ruling on hub zones, and what effect is that having at the Department of DHS on its small business procurements?
Dario, I can't speak immediately to the Department of Homeland Security, but I think they're feeling the same pinch that all of our federal government agencies are feeling. And for you people out there who don't understand the GAO hub zone ruling of 2 years ago, it's a ruling that's impacting negatively the small business program under the SBA and Part 19 of the FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulations. There's a 23% goal across the federal government for small businesses. 23%. That's a lot. That's a lot of money across all the expenditures every year from our budget. The fact of the matter is that 23% is broken down by women businesses, minority-owned businesses, service-disabled veteran-owned businesses, and hub zone businesses. And as I talk to you about this very briefly, I have nothing against hub zones. I think the program is a viable program, if you can understand it. And what happened is when the legislation was written, it was written in a manner that the FAR said that if the contracting officer is aware of 2 or more minority small businesses, service-disabled businesses, woman-owned businesses, that the contracting officer may set that work aside for those small business groups. However, when FAR legislation, when the hub zone legislation came through, it was written in such a manner, it said that if the contracting officer is aware of 2 or more hub zones that can do the work, the contracting officer shall set the work aside. So this one word, shall versus may, is causing a large problem, because what's happened is hub zone companies have protested awards to other small business that had small business set-asides on the basis that the contracting officer should have set the work aside for hub zone, and these protests are being upheld by the General Accounting Office. So what's happening is many of our federal government agencies are somewhat hesitant in putting out certain set-asides for service-disabled vets, minority business, and women businesses, knowing that these may come back and be protested by hub zone. So I think the same negative impact is being felt across all federal government agencies being felt by the Department of Homeland Security as well. The only way this is going to change, by the way, is through legislation. We've heard people sit up here and tell you about all these good things and this board that's going to meet and they're going to give the president a report. We've been trying to get the hub zone legislation trained for 2 years, and the Senate and the House can't get together and do that. So that's the only thing that's going to change this ruling, and hopefully it will get changed soon.
Mr. Gunderson, I'd like you to respond to the same question. How are you dealing with the issue of this ruling in your small business program?
Thanks for being able to add on to this. First off, just to give a quick sense of where we're at with the small business community at DHS, we're actually very proud. Over the past 3 years, maybe 4 years, we've been running over 30% of our dollars to the small business community. And we actually do track it into the various categories that Wayne mentioned. And with the exception of the service-disabled veteran-owned, we have exceeded each of the goals. And the service-disabled veteran-owned, we've actually taken particular strategies to address that through certain procurements, and we're actually running at 2.9% this year, so we're a fraction under the 3% goal there. But overall, what I'm trying to do is give you a sense of we value certainly just not the small business community, but we do want to reach out to the individual categories associated with this and through different strategies that we can. So we do, I'll say, support the parity approach to being able to do small business opportunities and competitions. And where we have run into, I think that we've had some limited instances where we've had some questions and some interest from particular hub zone companies along the way, but we've been able to work through all those.
Any questions out there? Okay, yeah, question, please.
How closely do you monitor the statistics that come from small business subcontracting plans from the large contractors? I'm aware of a case where a large contractor has hired a small business to do procurement for them. So you can literally do millions of dollars worth of procurement with 1 or 2 people through a small business. I'm assuming they're taking small business credit for that. Do you guys monitor what they report?
We have, to give, again, the sense of the lay of the land for DHS, within the Office of Chief Procurement Officer, I have the OSDBU office, which is there for the kind of the strategic leadership for the small business program at DHS. And then within the individual components, we have small business specialists. Both of these organizations are looking into ESRS and monitoring subcontracting progress along the ways. There have been instances where, if issues get raised to us, we'll dive into more particulars and working with the prime to understand the exact dollars. So it's really a tiered examination, both from the OSDBU office as well as the local component office.
Rick Nelson has to leave us in a couple of minutes, so he has to be out of here at 12:40. So I want to ask him a question, a couple questions before he has to leave. Rick, DHS is an umbrella organization with as I mentioned, some 22 agencies. They need to accomplish a cohesive procurement policy. In your estimation, has DHS been able to harness all of these 22 agencies with a unified procurement policy? If there isn't, and do legacy issues of the various disparate agencies still present barriers to business being able to do work with DHS?
No, I mean, again, clearly, DHS is struggling with this issue, but they should, be given credit where credit is due, and they are making progress. Again, DHS has been in existence for 7 years. Just by comparison, if you look at other major, Defense Department, let's look at a major acquisition program such as JSF. The first contract on JSF was awarded in 1996 after consolidation of 2 other programs. So, I mean, a major acquisition program such as that, has been around for almost, twice and arguably 3 times as long as DHS has been around. Along the same lines, we just talked about, this is a government-wide problem, the issue of acquisition experts. So when you're standing up a new department and you're looking to bring in acquisition experts, it's not like those that are working in Department of Defense or elsewhere are immediately going to leave their positions and go join a brand new department whose future is uncertain. So it's going to take some time to build up this expertise. And unfortunately, the political climate the last couple of years hasn't allowed DHS, hasn't given them the room to do what they needed to do to buy the right technologies and to manage the programs correctly. And we have to remember that, DOD still doesn't do this right. When you look at the tanker situation and multiple other examples, that this is going to be, again, it's a contract between the DHS and the provider. If you look at SBInet, no one was a winner in SBInet. Boeing wasn't a winner, and DHS wasn't a winner. So spreading blame over everyone, and it, certainly United States citizens were a winner of that program. So it's important moving forward that the DHS be given some latitude to make these improvements. The recommendations that they've been and the criticisms have been rendered on DHS by the GAO and others have been accepted by DHS for the most part, and DHS has begun to take, I think, significant corrective action. We have to keep in mind that, DHS is, there's never been an organization like it, 22 disparate department and agencies. And those of you in the room, and some people may say, well, DHS needs to go away. It's never going to happen. We've never disestablished a department or agency. What we need to do is figure out, well, not an agency, but a department. We need to figure out how to make DHS work and appreciate and understand the constraints that they're under. That's not to excuse DHS, because again, at the end of the day, they are the client, and they are responsible for managing the programs effectively. But we also have to understand the pressures that they've been under the last 7 years. Thank you.
Any questions out there? I can't see. Question? Please.
My name is Mason Chaudhry. I represent a hub zone company out of West Virginia. There seems to be a lot of abrasiveness towards hub zones within the government. And looking at Eagle 2, we're going to be bidding under the hub zone category. Looking at Eagle 1, one of the things we noticed is that a lot of task orders didn't come out. I'm not sure, for hub zones. I'm trying to figure out, is it because the federal government doesn't see a lot of IT companies come out of hub zones, or do they just see custodial work coming out of hub zones, or are we going to see in Eagle 2 a more proportionate distribution towards the set-asides, for example, like good companies that come out of hub zones?
Well, first off, I would say that I wouldn't try to categorize a hub zone community as being targeted into a specific service or function. So as far as what happened on Eagle 1 to date on the different types of task orders, I don't know the particulars on that. I do know on Eagle 2 going forward, as we do establish these different channels for the opportunities for the respective categories, we want to look at, number one, what are the capabilities that the Eagle 2 companies offer to us and best fit the needs of the department and be able to align our needs with the capabilities of the firm.
I want to move into, thank you. I want to move into insourcing. Rick Gunderson, it's reported that DHS is going to be insourcing 3,000 jobs in the coming year. Several hundred of these are acquisition functions. I have several questions. There's 3 points. What process is DHS using to ensure the actions are in the best interest of the taxpayer? Number 2, in your estimation, what effect will these actions have on small business? And third, I want to have a follow-on question to a question a gentleman asked in the previous panel is, in your opinion, why isn't insourcing is one thing, Rick, but why isn't taking a contractor's employees not a violation of the contract that the contractor has with the government? Why is that not out of bounds?
Okay. In listening to Stuart address some of these questions on the first panel, I heard some similarities in the way DHS is approaching this issue. And I try to stay away from the word insourcing because when the memo came out last year from OMB last July, it's referred to as the multi-sector workforce. As we started to develop, analyze what does this mean to DHS and what do we need to do going forward, the word that kept coming up and the word that still exists today and is a part of the DHS policy going forward is balance. What is the balance, the workforce strategy for DHS? And I think Rick had mentioned it earlier. First, when you think about where's DHS going with this, you have to look at where we've been. And DHS back in '03 when it was set up, and TSA prior to that, there was, number one, a philosophy and a need to, significantly leverage industry and the resources available to get to where we needed to be. And I think over time, as we start to closely examine our mission functions and our in-house capabilities and our competencies, there's a recognition that to a certain extent there's a over-reliance. And in particular, one of the things that Stuart talked about, and I think the Secretary mentioned, was the staff augmentation areas. I look across the department, and both in my tenure at TSA when I was in the operational contracting side, as well as my time at headquarters, I've encountered time and time again program organizations that just don't have the core competencies to manage their programs. Too often times we don't have that peer-to-peer relationship with the industry that's needed. So as the number that Dario threw out, I think that was kind of a quick examination that was done last summer to say, where do we think we have some opportunities to be able to strengthen the government workforce to make sure that we control the mission set and can also oversee the contractors that we have. There's been numerous findings on various programs through DHS's tenure that have identified that as a weakness that we need to address, and we do take that seriously. So going forward, we are going to, we're working in accordance with the OMB guidance to look at, I think the inherently governmental function issue isn't going to be the one that's going to create apprehension, I think, with industry. It's when you get into the more gray area of what are those critical and core functions that you try and really start to see where is the right balance. And then eventually you would get into the areas where you'd be doing full cost analysis, et cetera. So there is, if I try to wrap this up, the first part, there is going to be a disciplined process to be able to examine the individual needs and mission requirements to make sure that we do have sufficient government personnel to oversee that operation. There's not a quota per se that we've targeted at this point. I think there's just a perception or a recognition that there are areas across the department that there is an over-reliance that we need to closely examine and make a final determination. And ultimately, it needs to be in the best interest of the government and the public.
My last part of that question, though, I want to follow. Why isn't it that taking a contractor's employees is not a violation, or shouldn't it be a violation of the contractual relationship that I as a contractor have with you? Insourcing is one thing. Taking my employees is something else. Why isn't that off limits? In any other relationship that I have, if I have a business relationship with Carlos Del Toro, we have a non-compete. I won't steal his employees, he won't steal mine if we stop doing business. The government will take the contract, but also take my employees. Why is that fair?
The government, when it's examining what its needs are, and if it determines that it needs to have 5 additional people through that process, it should go through the normal hiring process and examining who are the best qualified candidates for that job. I'm sure in some situations that might be a person who's been performing in that line of business or supporting that organization. So I think as long as the government is going through its hiring process that it's identified a need to fulfill a vacancy, that would be an appropriate process.
Let me, any other questions out there? I can't see over here. Any questions? Then I want two other questions. Number one is that the department has set aside goals that range from 32% to 50% to 60% to 21%. Generally speaking, over the last year or this year, is the department meeting its set aside goals?
Yes. In 2009, for example, 32.4% went to small business prime. That's $4.7 billion. In the 8A category, 6%. Women-owned small business, 7.9%. Hub zone was 2.7%. And the service disabled last year was 1.9%. But again, this year we've upped that to 2.9%. So again, we've been rated green by the Small Business Administration in the last few years. Very proud of that. We're continuing to look at opportunities. I mentioned service disabled veteran owned. Last year we created the PACS program, Professional Administrative Clerical Technical Services Program, which is a service disabled veteran owned set aside to provide services in those areas for the entire department.
All right, I have one more question, then I'm going to look for questions here. If not, I'm going to ask the panelists.
I have one.
Go ahead, please.
We are a veteran-owned small business, but not service-disabled veteran-owned. And what we're noticing is that category just never seems to pop up in things. It doesn't pop up in Eagle 2. We are an IT company. And I sort of get the impression from people that the government is trying to, because of the obvious things going on with two wars going on, trying to put more emphasis on veteran-owned small businesses, but we're just not seeing that. What's going on with Eagle 2?
If I might answer that, my company, Service Disabled Veteran, I'm a Vietnam veteran. There is no veteran-owned business program. There is no such platform in the government. The only place there is under Public Law 109-461 in the Veterans Department. Now, under the VA Veterans First program under Public Law 109-461, there is, in fact, a 3% goal for veteran-owned businesses and a 5% goal for service-disabled veteran-owned businesses. But as a separate group, apart and aside from service-disabled vets, there is no group or category for small businesses for veteran-owned small businesses. There is no requirement for the government to set work aside for veteran-owned small businesses as such. For service-disabled veteran-owned businesses, yes. Many people in our veterans community are trying to change that, and it's going to be a little hard to do, but we're pushing in that direction.
Anything to add, Rick?
With that said, it is a category that we do track on a monthly basis. So it's not that it's a dismissed category. It is something that we pay attention to, and just as we do the other categories.
Any other questions out there? All right, one last question, then we'll wrap it up with your closing comments, both of you. Will the department be moving towards awarding more fixed firm price contracts? And since it appears that government is heading that way, these contracts pose a greater risk to the contractor and a greater responsibility on the department to accurately describe its requirements. That said, will this risk that the contractor is taking be taken into consideration when evaluating a contract's profit margin for future contract awards? Rick?
Yeah, Congressman Davis touched on this a couple ways. He talked about requirements. He also talked about value. And certainly OMB and the administration has indicated that we need to make a move towards fixed price contracting. And having been doing operational contracting myself for 20 years, I know we don't want to force fixed price contracting into situations where you can't and it doesn't make sense and it produces undue risk on the contracting community. So yes, we do intend to try and increase the number of fixed price contracts that we have, but that's going to be done through better requirements definition and better program offices. A lot of talk today from Stuart touched on a little bit earlier today about acquisition workforce. We are very focused on strengthening the program offices who can define those requirements, which would ultimately lead to being able to do fixed price contracts. When you get to a situation where you're sufficiently able to define the requirements, do fixed price, correspondingly, as a proposal is put together, the profit margin associated with a fixed price contract would be commensurate with it. Certainly there's policies out there that guide us in what's an appropriate profit for a fixed price or a fee for a cost type contract.
Thank you. Start with Wayne, your closing remarks.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure being here. You know, and I would have liked to have an opportunity to talk to you about just some just basic small business issues we have to be careful of. I started my business with $600. I didn't have a car, didn't have a suit. You know, I knocked on doors, and I've now been in business for 21 years. And I've learned along the way. I've learned some very hard lessons. But I want you to be very cognizant of something that just came to me when the Sergeant Major was speaking about this issue of the life vest. It caught me immediately, and this is no indictment on what he said, or there's no conjecture here on my behalf, but he mentioned he was walking around with a guy who works with a company. It's a billion-dollar company, and he works directly with these people. When you go to talk to federal government contracts officers and buyers, do not bring a billion-dollar company with you. There's a thing out here called the rule of affiliation. The federal government is already enabled to give you work, to give us work based upon our inherent capability to perform that work at a good cost. But if there's any reason to believe that you are a front, or you are bringing that big business to do the work and you're just going to get the kickback, I assure you, you will not get any work. The small business mandates are out here to help us grow into our economy. And we have some folks out here that go to big businesses, and those big businesses do all the work. They do none of it. So be very careful how you present yourself to the federal government if you're being supported with a large business, because that law of affiliation will bite you and bite you hard.
Rick?
Not sure how familiar everyone here is. Some of you may be very familiar with DHS, done business with us, others maybe not. As I described earlier, we got a very diverse mission set. We have 9 different buying activities across the department, mostly affiliated with a single element, and then we have an Office of Procurement Operations at the headquarters that supports multiple organizations. So there's lots of different opportunities out there and lots of different ways to learn about business opportunities at DHS. I mean, the ones that are available on a regular basis, you're very familiar with the federal business opportunities, and also our advanced acquisition plan at fido.gov. And I know people aren't enthralled with maybe the currency of that information, but we do attempt to populate it on a regular basis. With that said, though, there are other things that we do to try and get people a little advance notice of opportunities. Typically in the November timeframe, we hold an industry day. We've done this the past few years, where we have each of the components represented to talk about what is kind of at a high level the forecast for that fiscal year as far as procurement opportunities. So I encourage you to look for that. If you go to our website on occasion, Open for Business, you'll be able to see about that event that will take place later this fall. From a small business standpoint, we do routine monthly vendor outreach events in the area and also regionally. We're just down in Texas last week doing a regional event where we bring in some prime contractors, for opportunities to meet them as well. We've previously done Atlanta and Chicago, so we try to move that event around on an annual basis. And then I think you heard Ms. Oliver before talking about the small business specialists. Again, each of our components has small business specialists that have a door for you to come in and to learn. They are very active and want to be able to help you. And then we do also have a industry ombudsman within my organization that's available to listen. He's very familiar with the landscape at DHS and can guide you through that process.
Thank you very much. Now, one of the things I want to say to all of you is that we recognize that we're the only thing that's standing between you and lunch. So thanks for being here. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for listening to us. And would you please help me in welcoming and thanking our panelists? Thank you very much.